Do you know anyone who might be guilty of pray acting? Is it possible that you are guilty of pray acting? You say you're not even sure what pray acting is? Well, hey, stay tuned for this brief Bible study and we'll talk all about it. Hi, this is Pastor Mark Pierce with Church Requel, and we are here for Bible study number 138 on this Saturday, May the 23rd. Today, the topic will be pray acting, as you've already heard. But before we get to our Bible study, you can see behind me that we are located here today, again, at Kingwood Center. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. And this time of the year, from now until really June, July, it's probably some of the most beautiful time with all the beautiful flowers that we see out behind us. So anyway, let's take our Bibles and turn to Matthew chapter 6. And we'll be reading from verse 5 today. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. Here, for the second time, Jesus uses the word hypocrite. You might remember from a couple of days ago that this word hypocrite is used 18 times in the New Testament, 13 of those times here in the book of Matthew. So Jesus is talking here about the pretense, because that's what hypocrite means. It means to be acting, putting a mask on, to be pretending to be something that you're not. So Jesus here is talking about someone who is making a pretense of actually praying to God. He is saying that these pretenders, these actors, these hypocrites love to stand on the street corners so that they can be seen by others. Let me just share a personal story with you. I recall very vividly when I was just a youngster that there was one man in our church who could pray longer than everyone else. Now, the reason I know that is because we had this habit of everybody praying all at the same time. My mom and dad faithfully took me to church on Sunday mornings and again on Sunday nights and then again on Wednesday night. And on Wednesday night, we would have prayer meeting where everybody would pray. Well, this one fella, and by the way, they would all pray all at the same time. Well, this one fella was someone who could pray longer than anyone. When everybody else petered out, this fella would just keep on praying. He had the ability to pray for an unbelievable length of time. Well, one night, my mom and dad let me sit wherever I wanted to sit, so I sat next to this guy because I wanted to know how he did it. And boy, was I disappointed, because when I sat right next to him, I found out that he didn't even begin to pray until almost everybody else was done. You see, he wanted to be heard by everyone else. He was guilty of pray acting. Now, maybe this is not true of you, but the question is, are you someone who prays differently when you're with other people? Is there kind of this right way to pray, this right sound to pray? Is there a righteousness that you take on, a persona that you take on when you're praying in front of other people, and not there when you're praying by yourself? Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the balance in giving. Well, there's a balance in praying as well. Certainly, there are times where it's right for us to be praying with other people in a group. Jesus, after all, told us that where 2 or 3 come together in His name, there He will be with us also. And next week and the week after, as we get into Jesus' model prayer, where we're going to be talking about what we know as the Lord's Prayer, remember, it is a prayer for the group. It's our Father. Give us our daily bread, right? It's not a personal prayer. It's a prayer with other people. But Jesus here is talking about that we should make sure that there is times where we pray privately, and that if we are with other people, that we be very careful what the motive of our heart is, that we pray so that God hears us, not so that other people could hear us. Certainly, there was no nation on earth that was more concerned about their prayer life than what the Jewish folks were of the first century. Rabbinical sayings very much affirm this. For example, there's one rabbinical saying that goes this way: "Great is prayer, greater than all good works." Another rabbinical saying goes this way: "He who prays within his house surrounds it with a wall that is stronger than iron." Now, while the Jewish habit of prayer was a great one, and one, frankly, that many people today in our nation should aspire to, there were certain faults that had crept into their life. And quite frankly, for many Christians today, I think we could be guilty of these same faults. Today, we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about these faults of prayer. And then when we come back on Monday, we're going to talk about the right way to do secret agent praying. The first fault that we think about here is that their prayers had become formalized. Their habit was to pray what's known as the full Shema from Deuteronomy 6 and Numbers 15. And it had to be repeated every morning and every evening. Now, you know this prayer. It's the one that we see from Deuteronomy that begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God." Certainly, it could be prayed with reverence and with adoration and with love, but many people simply mumbled through it as a vain repetition. And by the way, before we get too guilty of throwing the first stone, remember that many of us as Christians do exactly the same thing, don't we? When we mumble our way through grace before a meal. A second fault that had crept in was stated prayers for all occasions. Now, on the one hand, this is a great idea that they had thought through just about every possible occasion and came up with a formal prayer for it. But the problem, again, came down to that there was this tendency to glibly repeat the right prayer at the right time without really thinking it through. A third fault was the set time for prayers. You see, they were to pray at the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, and the 9th hour, which would be our way of saying 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. Again, it's a good intention to make sure that there are set times throughout the day to remember God. But again, we see this tendency towards habitual formality, that the good intention didn't always add up to the right result. A fourth fault that had crept into them, and also could be true for us today, is the tendency to connect prayer with certain places. We see this is true of even Peter and John in the early church, that they were going to the temple at the hour of prayer, as it said in Acts chapter 3, verse 1. We must remember that God is not confined to only what we would consider to be holy places, for wherever God is, and of course He is everywhere, is ultimately holy. It's where we remember Him that makes a place holy. The fifth criticism is the tendency towards long prayers. Again, this is not something just confined to the Jewish people. Barclay writes in his commentary that there is a subconscious idea that if men battle long enough at God's door, that He will answer, that God can be talked and even pestered into answering prayer. And then a sixth thing that had crept in, a sixth fault that had crept in, was to simply repeat the same phrase over and over and over again in almost a hypnotic state. Again, this is something that people today have the tendency to do as well. And then the seventh fault that Jesus mentions here very clearly was that certain people prayed only to be seen by men. And Jesus tells us that they have already received their reward. When we come back on Monday, we're going to talk about secret agent praying and give you some sound advice for praying in the way that Jesus had in mind when He spoke to us in Matthew chapter 6. Tomorrow, of course, there'll be no Bible study, but we will have a sermon for you, part 5, in our What's Love Got to Do With It series, and the topic tomorrow is on attesting. Hey, thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.